welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of the AusCannaPodcast. I'm your host, Christina McMullen, and on today's episode, I'm coming to you from Tasmania. That's right, I've taken the podcast on the road, something hopefully I'll be doing a lot more of in the future. It's been a whirlwind adventure exploring Hobart during my 3-day trip. If you follow me on Instagram, you've seen a lot of it unfold in real time. For those of you who don't, highlights included a ferry ride to the Museum of Old and New Art, plus a drive to the summit of Mount Wellington. Wow, what a view! But the highlight was an exclusive behind the scenes tour of Tasmanian Botanics' new greenhouse. I won't sugarcoat it, our audio is a bit rough. One microphone between two people and a laptop that's seen better days? Season 1, people, look, I can only go up from here. But in all seriousness, just close your eyes and imagine we're standing in a lush field surrounded by cannabis plants being harvested. And that background noise, well, that's just the greenhouse hard at work. Shh, work with me. So, without further ado, let's dive into my chat from a few weeks back with Dan Howard, CEO of Tasmanian Botanics, starting with some rapid fire questions. So I like to start with a little rapid fire, just to get to know you, break the ice. Sweet or savory?
Savory.
What's the most important lesson you learned last year?
Stick to your guns, and the only way through it is through it.
Ice hockey or field hockey?
Ice hockey.
First thing you do in the morning?
Brush my teeth.
Last book you read?
Ooh. The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared.
I've not heard of that. Is your bed made right now?
Yes, you can thank my partner.
Certificates or experience?
Experience.
Why?
Because you can't learn to drive a car by reading a book.
Fast growth or sustainable development?
Sustainable development.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Party animal or couch potato?
Ooh, now couch potato for sure.
If you were a spy, what would your code name be?
That's a tough one. No, I think maybe maple syrup.
Maple syrup, okay. Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
If a joint is being passed and is dropped, who is at fault, the passer or the dropper?
The passer. You can't let go until you have, a secure handoff.
Absolutely. Best advice you've ever been given?
Always bet on yourself.
Who's an Australian that everybody should know about?
Ooh. This is probably a sensitive topic as a Canadian, as a non-native Australian. I think everyone should know about globally Steve Irwin, because he had such a positive attitude and he was a great ambassador for the country.
Excellent. What's the best non-curse word, one-word insult?
Champ.
Ooh, okay. How is Vegemite best eaten?
On toast with butter.
What's one bucket item list you want to fulfill this year?
Ooh. I would like to do a trip from South Australia to Darwin, a road trip.
Excellent. And last question, at what point does a joint become a roach?
When it starts to burn your fingers.
Good deal. All right. So, first of all, thank you very much for opening up the doors here and giving me a tour and allowing me to kind of peek behind the curtain. I guess my first question would be for the listeners, can you explain, I guess, your process from seed to tub?
Sure. So Here, everything is done on site, so we maintain a stock of mother plants of all of our commercial cultivars. We have a process of cutting, so all of our THC plants are generated from clones, which are originally one plant that we have phenotyped, chosen the best one that meets all of our requirements for that product, and then we clone it into mother stock and keep a rolling stock of those mothers. So that's how we keep our mother stock and how we arrive at our genetic profiles that we use. But we have a cutting. It is then in propagation for a couple of weeks with some rooting hormone in little pellets where it grows roots. We then put into bigger grow blocks for about a week where it hardens up before being transferred into the greenhouse. Then it goes into the greenhouse where it veges for 2 weeks and then flowers for 8 weeks, which can vary somewhat strain to strain, but our standard is an 8-week flower period. And then we harvest and hang dry until it reaches about 12% moisture. And then we take it off the stems. It's a mixture, both our destemming and trimming is a mixture of hand and mechanical techniques. And then the trimming is all mechanically trimmed to a point, and then hand trim finish for all of our different cultivars, both outdoor and indoor. After that, it is bulk packaged into large cheese pouch type bags, and it goes for bulk irradiation, where 5 kilogram boxes are irradiated for about 10 to 15 seconds, low dose cool e-beam irradiation, and then shipped back here. That's the only time the product leaves our site, as there is only one site in Australia that can do the e-beam process. It leaves for about 48 hours, comes back, and it is then packaged into 10 or 28 gram jars.
So you were saying there that basically the product is only out of your site for about 48 hours.
Yes, that's correct.
So you're fully integrated.
Yep.
So do you feel like that definitely gives you a competitive edge when comparing to, say, another flower on the market?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a gift and a curse. I think at the end of the day, it has taken us much longer than if we were only doing a part of the value chain to reach the type of scale that we have now. You basically have to, open up the bottlenecks through the entire chain, and we've actually gone and done it in reverse, in increasing our processing, then backing into now having increased our greenhouse, as that's the biggest infrastructure project. It took us about close to 18 months to fit out the inside, and we've also self-funded that out of our own kind of operating cash flow. So it's a lot of work, and if something goes wrong, you don't really have a backup to fall back on. You can't just go to another import supplier. You have to figure out the problems yourself. But when you do it right, obviously we have nobody. We're not paying. We're not buying our input product and then paying someone to put it in a jar. Those are all internal costs, and there's only one person who is building a margin in to that wholesale, and that's us. Versus, again, if you're paying a packaging person and a grower, a packaging person, and a sales organization to do all that work for you, there's 3, 4, 5 different organizations needing to build their margin into that product. So
you would say in general that you're pretty hands-on with everything that's kind of happening?
Yes, I think if you ask the staff, I'm probably too hands-on. But I think everyone here, there's a lot of care for the product, and there's a lot of, we've moved extremely fast in a short amount of time, and in order to do that, it's stressful, and I think it's only fair that I share in the pain and the stress and the things that I ask our staff to do and change and iterate. if you're not present and don't, viscerally experience what everyone's experiencing, it's really hard to make those kinds of asks if you're not in the trenches with everyone.
Fair enough. It's a pretty competitive market, and I'm correct in saying that Tasmanian Botanics is the only one who is 100% Aussie, fully integrated. And I know that we said earlier on the tour, and I don't think you mentioned it when you were explaining things, but from clone to tub, it's about 4 months. So compare that to maybe somebody who's importing flowers in.
Yeah, I think, obviously the time, if you look at it from a product freshness perspective, it's impossible for anyone importing flower to have product as fresh as we can get it into the tub. Like even in a worst case scenario, when we look at seasonal harvests, it's harvested and sold. It's no more than 6 or 7 months old from harvest. And I would fashion to guess there's a lot of product coming in from overseas that is well over 18 months old before it even hits the shore here. And so it still needs to be packaged and then moved out. So generally it takes a couple of months at least to ship product from North America to here. And our regular greenhouse flowers, from harvest date to being in a jar to being in a pharmacy, is generally about 4 weeks after harvest. It's sitting on a pharmacy shelf. It's been dried, cured, trimmed, processed, and packaged in its final form within 4 weeks. We'll be packaging, for example, our first harvest out of the large greenhouse, we'll be packaging that product next week, and the harvest happened 12 days ago.
Okay, so that's a pretty impressive turnaround. Talk to me about in-house genetics, because I personally have, a passion for genetics. I like to know where plants are coming from and why they were crossed a certain way. I know we can only talk in general terms, but is there anything maybe genetics-wise that you guys have in research and development that we should potentially keep an eye for?
Yeah, I think the starting spot is effectively you need to acquire some genetics from somewhere. And I think our team here has done an excellent job of getting 6 to 7 very high quality genetic profiles that we imported, and then really aggressively phenotyping them to get a good base. Again, you have to start somewhere, so get a good base of genetics. And you can see in our different cultivars that we have out right now in the market, and even some that we've had in the past, those began as imported phenotyping, and then some sort of tweaking often or a cross here or there. But we have developed about 3 or 4 what we think are very interesting products. We'll be having one new regular rotation come out probably within the next 2.5 to 3 months. It's already planted. It's in, you saw today, it was in one of our greenhouse chambers and is in flower right now. So we'll be happy to bring that both to domestic partners and potentially international partners as well.
So let's touch on that briefly. Speculation. Everything that comes out of here is 100% what you're growing here. You're not importing something in to export it out as yours.
That's correct. Everything that is in a tub is Australian grown. We're not in the business of buying and flipping product. We effectively, all of this, to be completely transparent, comes from my experience in the Canadian market, where it's, for lack of a better term, apocalyptic from a business perspective. And the business and the amount of cannabis being sold is astronomical. Quality is of product, the availability of high potency, high terpene content flower is abundant, and pricing per gram has just on the wholesale side has absolutely cratered. So in coming here, I knew we had to build a business that was ready for that occurrence to happen in Australia. And you can't build a business that way if you don't control the controllables. And I just don't have confidence that there's anyone in Australia that is doing such an amazing job at one part of the supply chain.
So looking at products that are on the Canadian market, is there anything that you've seen over there that you think would be great to bring here?
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of, we don't see as much of it here. The real kind of diesel-y, the real kind of funky, different cheeses, gas, diesel type terpene profiles. And I think that's a product of a lot of the seed providers. Their top sellers or their top ones aren't that type. So the growers that are growing here, didn't import those types. I think also there's just a lot of cookies crosses out there these days.
Yes.
And there's a few reasons for that. I think they grow well. The potencies are good. The appearance and the density is really good, and so they're prone to be good for mass production. But yeah, I think over time we'd like to definitely bring out. We have a couple in development here. Some of those a little bit more earthy, gassy types that you either love them or you hate them. But the people who swear by them are swear by them.
That's true. I think there seems to be a lot of, I guess, and I'm not a big fan of using indica and sativa to label my plants, but there seems to be a lot of indicas out, a lot more sedating, a lot more couch locking kind of plants on the market, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of energizing, uplifting. Is that something that you feel is lacking in the Australian market, or is it just one of those things we're just not kind of interested in it?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think a lot of times the trouble is some people, even with sativas, they're not energizing to them. So
it's true.
It's one of those things where the.
Let me back that up. I like hazes.
Yes.
Right. Hazes are typically very invigorating strains.
Yeah.
Right? They motivate you. They get you up off the couch, knocking off my to-do list, go, go, go. There don't seem to be a lot of cultivars like that on the Australian market. Do you think it's just because perhaps the Australian medicinal patient is not looking for that because they're doing it more for, pain and insomnia, so they need something that's more sedating?
I think that the biggest driver of that is those are usually 17 to 21, 22% type flowers. And whether you're growing it or importing it, the way the market has gone is that it's driving into higher THC type products. And those are your, real heavy indica, resinous indica type products. Generally speaking, I think that is, potency isn't everything, but at the end of the day, because of the nature of the business of medicinal cannabis in Australia, New Zealand, and abroad, you can't say anything other than what the label says, and that has active ingredient, and that's about it. And so that's the only way to differentiate. So a lot of people look at the value on the potency for the dollar you're paying, and that is, as much as I wish and as much as people claim that doesn't matter, the data will prove out that is how people shop, and I don't blame them, because again, it's expensive. When other medicines that they're probably subbing out are covered by the PBS, and this is an out-of-pocket product, it doesn't shock me that the value for active ingredient is a significant driver of decisions out there.
So how do you educate people to make better decisions? Because I'm with you. I THC is not the be all end all. As weird as it sounds, it's one of the last things that I look at when I'm looking for next flowers that I want to try.
Yeah, and I think some of it is education, but at the end of the day, the reality is if somebody might have to try four, five, six different cultivars, you know, it's time, it's potentially wasted money, it's 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 not right of me and my situation sitting here say, well, you should really be buying lots of different flowers and seeing what that looks like when they're that's hundreds of dollars of explore plus consult fees plus.
Yeah, it adds up quick, real quick.
The reality is as a company we try our best to put out um, a range of cultivars which tick different boxes that don't have huge overlaps in their Venn diagrams of the type of product it is, at a really strong value. So our hope is that within our set, we cover 80% of patients out there with a product at a high value. But yeah, it is a journey of exploration, and it's one that the one thing I would say is if something doesn't seem to be working for you, don't give up, and don't assume that active ingredient on the label necessarily translates to efficacy.
There are a lot of products on the market.
Mm-hmm.
You guys definitely do. Uh, what's the word I'm searching for? Cartridges. Yep. And oils. Is there anything else that you would be bringing onto the market that would be slightly different?
Yeah. So right now, like again, our strategy here is we try to address the large market segments that we don't feel have accessible and affordable options, and so we're likely not going to be on the bleeding edge of new products, because those are for the folks who are bringing in that product from overseas that are tapping into production capacities that if a product isn't successful, they haven't built a facility for it. And because we do everything here, when we get into a product, vape carts as an example, that was a 14-month project from the first, orders we made for equipment to being able to launch. And it was, it's very expensive to develop these GMP processes and get the licensing required from the TGA.
I was going to say, let's talk about that real quick. So for the listener who doesn't know, what is GMP?
Yeah, so GMP is a good manufacturing process. And in our world, I mean, it means lots of things in food and in nutraceuticals. In our world, good manufacturing practices for pharmaceutical products uses the PICS scheme in Australia, which is it's a internationally recognized kind of standard that there's some mutual recognition between Australia and Europe and other countries, South Africa, that reference the same kind of standards, but it's about having a very, very high degree of consistency, repeatability, and it involves a lot of data gathering, a lot of process development, and you're effectively trying to eliminate any variability in the product as much as you possibly can. Obviously, the further down the processing chain it gets, when you get into oral liquids and vape carts, you've had some formulation opportunities. Flour has a little more variability, and the TGA, requirements allow for a larger variability within flour, just because it is a lot more of a
it's a plant. It's an agricultural
directly dried plant material. Whereas as you get into oral liquids and vape carts and things like that, your tolerance is much tighter, and as you get down that manufacturing chain, you just have to have very, very defined and tested processes that effectively ensure the same outcome every time. And so it's just a lot of process development, a lot of validation of that work, a lot of data collection, and it takes months and months and months. Even if you made your prototype and it's great, you're probably still 9 months out from being able to launch it because, again, stability requirements and other things, it's a very involved process.
So does the TGA show up on a regular basis to check things?
Not a regular basis, but they certainly have a right to show up whenever they want. I'll say that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
As does the Office of Drug Control. So as a vertically integrated manufacturer, we have to maintain licenses with both the Office of Drug Control for the production and processing of controlled substances, and then with the TGA for the manufacturing of controlled pharmaceutical and Schedule 8 drugs. So it's many in Australia will either have a TGA manufacturing license or an ODC license, but very few have both.
And so you guys have both?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we have both.
Okay. All right. And so then I guess this would be the Reddit question, if you will. You would probably have to do extensive background checks and things like that for anybody that would work at a facility like this.
That's correct. And, the background checks, you need a national police check. There are some Office of Drug Control attestations that need to be done. Having some incident somewhere on a background check isn't a foregone conclusion that you're not employable here. But it will factor into a decision that ultimately you're handling a Schedule 8 medicine. And we are required to treat that with no different severity as someone is handling opiates, someone that's handling, other very, very serious Schedule 8 medicines. And so that's the requirement, and that's how our process is set up.
Yeah, well, only seems fair, right? Yeah. Again, a lot of hoops to jump through.
Yeah, and we don't make the rules effectively. We just try our best to follow them to the letter of the law. And so while we are passionate about the medicinal products that we create here, we are of firm belief that they are much less harmful than many other substitute products. It's not our place and it's not our job to make those regulations. They are very complicated and there's a lot of other public health outcomes to consider. So we do our best to follow the rules, to have a good relationship with both the ODC and the TGA, and continue to advocate where we can, but just make high quality, affordable products that fit whatever the current rules are.
So again, because we are talking medicinal, what do you see Australia eventually going to a recreational market, or do you think we're still firmly a medicinal market? Because I believe we're, at best case scenario, we're still 5 to 7 years away.
Yeah, I've said this other times as well. I have a bit of an allergic reaction to the word recreational. Is there a recreational alcohol market? Is
No,
there a recreational
isn't.
Tobacco market?
Well, and nobody shows up on your doorstep to check your fridge to be, well, how many six-packs you got in there?
And so recreational is, I believe, is a term that is perpetuated to create a stigma and maintain a stigma. I think there is room for an adult use market in Australia that would be outside of a pharmaceutical kind of centric model, to allow responsible adults to buy cannabis products under a certain regulation. What that looks like, what that could look like, I don't know. I think other countries have managed to do it in a way that has, had, I would say, negligible negative public health outcomes and some pretty positive public health outcomes out of it. But it's a question for the Australian people ultimately. At the end of the day, when that scale tips, and I think there's a significant number of patients on medicinal cannabis that most people probably know someone, or at least know someone who knows someone that is a responsible human being that is consuming medical cannabis, and it is not impacting their life in a terrible way. And so I think as more people are exposed to it, it is more and more palatable for that to move in that direction. And so, the word recreational, it stirs up ideas of people smoking pot on the stairs in front of
Reefer madness.
exactly.
Yeah, it does.
And it doesn't have to be that. It can be a lot of different things. If you look at Uruguay, people can go and buy from a pharmacy if they're an adult. It's just behind the counter. If you look at Canada, obviously the access is a little more open, but stores that are licensed are allowed to sell it to adults that are of age. Jurisdictions, municipalities are allowed to say no stores allowed in this municipality if that's the consensus or the majority feeling in that area that people don't want that. That's fine, but by and large, it has had very little consequence, and it takes money out of illicit hands. And again, at this juncture in Australia, it's hard to say that there isn't a legitimate use for cannabis. I think there's enough people on it now that it's very difficult to make that argument.
I would agree. And I think from a patient perspective, I think one of my frustrations is when I'm talking to my girlfriends back in Canada and they're talking about, horrible PMS cramps and they're just going to drop their bath bomb into their hot bubble bath and, relax themselves, and there go their PMS cramps. But we don't have those products here. We don't have bath bombs. We don't have lotions. And I wonder why wouldn't we have let's talk about a lotion for somebody who has maybe arthritic hands. Why haven't any of the companies here decided, okay, well, maybe we should bring in a lotion for grandma who does still want to garden?
Yeah, I think it's a variety of reasons. A lot of the product that comes in from overseas and is sold is, you can bring in, with some of the changes that happened last year, you can bring in starting materials, which people have a liberal definition of that, depending on the supply chain. But ultimately, the idea is that it's fairly raw material, fairly raw, unprocessed material. And so bringing in a lotion, you'd be very hard pressed to call that a starting material. So it would need to be made in a GMP facility. And so once you cross that line, things are a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive. And so to say that, I want to bring in creams, or I want to make creams, all of your vendors, all of your inputs, all of that has to be GMP compliant, vendor assured. And so to jump off into that realm is...
Millions?
Maybe not millions for a product, but the bigger thing, months and months and months and months. So it's less about the money, more about the time and the investment to say, I'm going to focus my organization. You can't boil the ocean, so you can only do so many things at once. And if one of them is lotions and it turns out it's a bit of a flop, you've spent a year of your time and effort developing that thing. And yes, probably a substantial amount of money as well. But you come up, grasping for straws. And so I think it's the same reason why I think a lot of people are waiting on clinical trials, or even waiting for the regulations to change, that they won't need clinical trials, because it's really expensive, it's really time consuming, and success is certainly not guaranteed.
Clinical trials, yeah, that's I am under the impression that there's really only one clinical trial right now that's kind of showing any type of real positive outcome, and I think it's CBD that they're doing. They're not even doing THC, and I could be wrong on that. We'll have to fact check me later. But is that...
The difficult thing with clinical trials is, in Australia, if you did one with THC, it would still be a Schedule A drug. And so the reason why they're going on with CBD is they're potentially Schedule 3. which would be able to be sold much more openly if they were successful. And you need to effectively, in order for something like that to pay dividends and be worthwhile, you need to be able to kind of patent the formula or the process or something about it to protect yourself and to have invested all that time and money and risk into it. And at the end of the day, you can't patent THC, you can't patent CBD. So unless you've got some sort of proprietary process or
delivery system
or something that you are able to protect, it's very, very difficult. And ultimately, a lot of the things, the few products that are based with THC or CBD, like dronabinol in Germany, or Sativex or Epidiolex, you're looking at much higher dosage of CBD that is far beyond what would be considered allowed under Schedule 3 in a medically therapeutic dose. It's for much more severe conditions where the bodies are willing to accept higher risk to patients that are having 100 seizures a day. If it's going to, if it might damage their liver slightly with chronic use for 10 years, well, these children won't live for 10 years.
Yeah,
and so the trade-off is significant.
Well, they're kind of at their last resort. Exactly. Of thing. They've tried all these other things.
Exactly. And the condition itself is such a terrible condition that there is no conscionable way to say, if there's an alternative to living like this, no matter what it is, it's probably viable. You look at someone doing something for mild sleep disruptions.
Yeah.
And to say that I have mild sleep disruptions and not to say that can't over time really be damaging to someone. I'm not trying to say that in any way that that's not a significant issue for many people. But if a approving body was to say, we don't know if this might damage your liver over time, but you might wake up slightly less in the night, that's not a trade-off that they're as quickly going to approve. And so that's the big thing that makes these
They want
difficult.
paper. They want it on paper. Even though you and I know that cannabis has been consumed for thousands of years
for
and
sure.
blah, blah, blah.
You need to prove it.
You got to have it on paper
you
before
have to prove it.
Yeah, and I guess that's the hurdle, right? It's putting pen to paper and showing those numbers and double blind, randomized, all that sort of stuff.
And that's the only way to do it. And that's why many things are not successful in clinical trials, because the combination of the burden of proof required, combined with the potential placebo effects involved, combined with many, many other things, the consistency of the inputs, it's all very difficult. And flower, which is likely, people would say, the most acutely effective form is, inhalation of some
quickest
sort.
Onset, yeah.
Quickest onset, most dependable, the ability to titrate very, very rapidly, but there is almost zero consistency. Like you wouldn't be able to say this is exactly the same every time. Even if it was the same strain grown within the same harvest, you get variability. And so there's been a couple that have tried to standardize a pod with a certain amount of THC in it that is then a single-use vaporizer, but it's very difficult. It's a very difficult industry to conduct clinicals in, and so it's... So
it would almost beg the question of, should cannabis be regulated more as an agricultural product versus something that the TGA needed to regulate?
Yeah, again, it's I think it's both. Like, you need to regulate the cultivation, but then the consumption of it certainly needs to be regulated in some form, because it is a psychoactive substance that needs to have rules around it. But again, that's the Australian public needs to decide: do we want this? Do we think responsible adults can self-regulate with a broad access scheme, or do we need do we need to have doctors regulate who can and who cannot, who cannot, consume this substance?
Do you think cannabis will make it onto the PBS first, or do you think it'll be legalized first?
I think broader adult use will be allowed before it will be on the PBS.
I think the same thing. Which is sad. Because I do think that more doctors and more people would be willing to give it a try medicinally if it had that. And I'm not even saying being on the PBS is like a seal of approval, so to speak, but I think if it just had that little bit of endorsement, that there would definitely be more people that would try it.
Yeah, and I think the issue is the landscape out there right now is daunting of products, how many products are available, the formats available, how do they choose which companies they align with. Like it's very
overwhelming.
The people are launching new products weekly. It's a very complicated ecosystem, and it's one that if I was running the PBS, I would have a very hard time advocating, what to the head of or to the Prime Minister, why I'm choosing OG skunk from company X instead of Girl Scout cookies from company Y to put on the PBS, and what scrutiny they're put under. It's a complicated landscape.
Yeah, and I mean, even for me as a patient, it's very overwhelming. I mean, I check in with my clinic on a pretty regular basis. I'm somebody that builds a tolerance pretty quickly, so I'm always rotating out flowers, which is why I'm always trying new things. Yeah. But it's unreal. Sometimes I go to the clinic, I get my prescription, and by the time I go into the pharmacy, there's 20 more flowers out, right? And I can't even keep up with it, kind of thing.
And even that concept, and again, this is not saying I have nothing but the most empathy for cannabis patients, which is why we price how we price, which is why we really try to aim at affordability. But on the flip side, if I'm in their chair, it's very difficult when, the Australian public has yet to vote in a majority way to say we want medicinal cannabis. So they need to reflect the current views of the country. And it would just be very, very difficult to be in that position to make decisions, and people switching between products and shopping for different strains. That's not something that is familiar to the TGA, to
that's not how
pharmaceuticals in general.
I was going to say, that's not how you do pharmaceuticals in general.
But it's the way cannabis patients have been forced to behave. You force something underground, it's gonna act underground, and it is what it is, and I think all parties need to come to the table and say, listen, we are where we are. How do we chart a path forward with the mutual recognition that cannabis is a substance, a product, a medicine, whatever you want to call it, that helps a lot of people. It helps them in a lot of ways. And who am I to decide what is medicinal or therapeutic versus non-medicinal and therapeutic? A lot of people, if they couldn't have a couple of glasses of wine, they'd be on Xanax or Valium to relax at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So if they're scratching the same itch with two very different regulated products to achieve a result of stress reduction or helping them get to sleep at night or helping them relax, they're using two products that are in two very different classes of regulatory buckets for the same issue.
Outcome, basically. Yeah, they're trying to alleviate the same thing.
The same symptom is alleviated by different products in different ways. And so who's to say that there couldn't be a third bucket there that could be cannabis? And so to say this person's a rec user is slanderous in my opinion, and it just is it belittles people's issues just because they don't present like a traditional pharmaceutical patient.
I think cannabis has got an uphill battle. I think part of that is, again, the reefer madness, you smoke it and you're lazy and you're not a productive member of society and this and that. But the the thing is that I don't know. I find that I'm a way better member of society when I can consume my medicinal cannabis, and I'm more. What's the word I'm searching? I don't want to use the word cohesive, but my husband works oil and gas, and so when my child was little, I'm a single parent. I'm home by myself, and I was having trouble sleeping, and you take, say, an Ambien. Now, if I take an Ambien, that's going to knock me on my ass. Now, what happens if my toddler gets up in the middle of the night and they're sick and they need me? Now, I cannot function. If you wake me up in the middle of the night when I've taken an Ambien, I can't function on that. I'm loopy. I can't, it's a downhill, like, oh, it's an accident waiting to happen. However, if I'd consumed some cannabis and then gone to bed and then my kid wakes me up 3 hours later because he's upset, he's whatever, I can wake up and be a fully functional parent in that moment. And I think there needs to be more education around that kind of aspect.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, honestly, is just exposure, because I think it's very stigmatized until the biggest thing is people don't want to break the law.
Yeah.
So, it was pretty shocking in Canada. I was there during the adult use rollout, and before the adult use rollout, I was in the cannabis business when it was only medicinal, and then throughout that whole process, how quickly you'd see 4 65-year-old men on the golf course with a little joint in their bag when they might have been the guys who were demonizing it a year earlier, but because they're allowed, because it's totally not against the rules, they'll give it a try. And then immediately that's it.
Hey, it's not so bad.
It happens so quickly that you can't remember what it was like before. Like, it truly is just so normal that it's hurting no one. It's contributing to jobs and it's contributing to tax revenue. People are able to access it in a way that is much less expensive. It's not something that, and a lot of the argument is around, oh, well, it's a gateway drug. It's only a gateway drug because you have to go to a drug dealer to get it.
Bingo.
Bingo. If your pharmacist isn't trying to sell you cocaine when you go pick up your medicinal cannabis.
No, your even if you're going in there to pick up, again, an Ambien, your pharmacist doesn't go, hey, do you want an Oxycontin with that?
They're not cross-selling you on something else. And so by putting, same with, beer or cigarettes or any other regulated product that you have to be an adult to consume, you're not getting cross-sold. But if you had to go to an illicit market dealer of some sort to buy cigarettes, you can bet they'd be selling you
absolutely
other things.
Eventually. Yeah. I mean, I had a great black market dealer that I reference in my reviews all the time. Fabulous, had amazing flowers, but every now and then he had chocolate mushrooms, and so of course you're gonna grab some.
Right. And so I think at the end of the day, the speed at which people realize it's really not a big deal. And also the same people are often concerned about driving on cannabis. It's, people drive on endone.
How great is it?
People drive on Xanax.
How great is it to be in Tasmania and for me to go check out Mount Wellington and do the sites around here and not be stressed to the max that I have THC in my system.
Yeah.
How great is that?
If you're not impaired and you're on a prescription medication and you're not impaired, you shouldn't
be penalized. Yeah, if you're not under the influence, if you're consuming it responsibly, you shouldn't be penalized for it.
Correct. And that's how, I personally believe, and I think, we're fortunate in Tasmania that those laws exist here like that. But I think it seems like a real uphill battle, but I think whenever it changes, I think the shift will happen quite quickly. It usually is either a politician, state politician, runs with a platform that includes that, and it gets momentum, because once one state goes, they'll all go. Because it'll be evident almost immediately that there aren't massive, negative outcomes. They'll see there are huge, employment benefits as far as jobs and economic activity around cannabis. It's huge.
Well, I don't think anybody in Canada thought a drama teacher was going to get legalization across the
Yeah,
board. You
yeah,
know, Trudeau, drama teacher, like,
yeah.
we didn't think, I mean, I don't get me wrong, I voted for him for a multitude of reasons,
Yeah.
but I don't think any of us really thought, okay, this drama teacher, he's going to.
But it was a huge part of his platform, and it's I think a large reason why he had that initial win, and he was able to make that follow through with it.
He made it relatable,
Yeah,
right?
and again, to say like normal, productive, regular people can consume cannabis, and it can help them, and not harm others at the same time. And so, yeah, again, on the topic, uh, with my experience living in Canada with adult use being legal, I believe it is the direction most westernized countries will go in at their own pace. But I believe that when it does happen, the shift happens quickly, because I think once you've tipped that seesaw the other way and the majority is vocally opinionated that it's not harmful, and to let people be adults if they want, the lack of negative outcomes in other countries
Kind of stand for themselves.
stand for themselves.
They really do.
And we should expect the same lack of negative outcomes if that were to happen in Australia.
I don't think I don't think it's going to be this multi-billion-dollar industry overnight here, but I definitely do think that there would be um, the flow on from it would be huge.
It'd be significant. I mean, I think it's about a $8 or $9 billion industry in Canada, and that's in Canadian dollars. And if you adjust that for Australia, it still puts it at a $5 or $6 billion industry in Australia. It's, again, not to say that it will be as large, but to put it in relative terms, it's not insignificant, and that has led to price decreases for patients and consumers. It's led to lots of jobs. It's led to lots of positive outcomes. I think the Canadian landscape of producers is very challenged because of how the whole boom stock happened and a lot of money was spent. But that same issue has not happened to the same degree in Australia, because they had,
I think we learned some lessons.
when you had somewhere to lean on in the interim, whereas Canada couldn't bring it in from anywhere, and so 50 companies went out to be the biggest company, and then you had 50 companies that had the biggest greenhouse, and there just wasn't enough demand at the time for it, and there still isn't enough demand, even though it's a $8 billion industry. It was just way overdeveloped, and so Australia had a buffer to turn to in the shortfall time. So we didn't have to have 15 companies
Overbuilding, yeah, and flooding the market.
and flooding the market all at the same time, because
Yeah.
they all start at the same time, they all finish at the same time, and then all that product hits the market at the same time. Whereas the market has had a chance to grow to a point now where you can see a growth curve, and their Australian companies, hopefully we can displace what's been imported with local
Product. Yeah, because I mean that should be the end goal, right? Is
Yeah.
that you're supporting local.
Yeah, and if we can't, the end goal should be that local producers should be able to outcompete imported products.
That's a better way to say it.
That's the
Touche.
way we approach it.
Touche. Way better way to say it.
Yeah,
Yes.
we don't want charity from anyone. What we want is the ability to be on a level playing field, and to have the same rules applied to us as imported products and imported produced.
Technically, you haven't been with Tasmanian Botanics from the beginning, but if you could go back and do it all again, what were the 3 things that you would do differently?
I think the way this company and we have developed, we actually came at the right time. I think if we had tried to bite off a bigger chunk earlier, the market wasn't ready for what we've built here now. And so I don't think I would change anything from how the process has gone from a small greenhouse, the outdoor, what I think what I would change is that the initial focus here was not at all on the domestic market. It was a European focus. The German market would be, that's where it's the biggest market in the world. And nobody knew when I took this job. In my prior life, I had managed with a large publicly traded company, managed their global market development and their global expansion. And I'd actually been to Australia and Tasmania with them in the past. I'd never heard of Tasmanian Botanics. None of my global contacts or even Australian contacts had heard of Tasmanian Botanics. And to me, with the facilities that we have, we were one of the first licensed producers. With the amount of product we were able to grow, now looking back, that's shocking. So I think the biggest difference would be to have developed better domestic ties, because that's been our biggest struggle. With a Canadian at the helm, was to bang the drum that we're the most Australian. We're the most Australian, vertically integrated company out there. And so I think it comes through, and I think we've had lots of folks out to the site, and politicians and doctors and pharmacists, and educating lots of people. But I think that's probably the biggest mistake, was a lack of focus on that. And then secondarily, a big course correction was a complete lack of respect for the flower. And so it was all about how do we make our products look and feel as pharmaceutical as possible. Extracts, maybe we'll do tablets, maybe we'll do gel caps. Flower is the majority of the market, and to ignore that is naive, I think, and a little bit ignorant in my opinion, because you need to be able to address the market that exists, and that market, even in Germany, is flower. And so I think those are probably the two biggest things, and there's probably some sub things in there that I could pull out, but realize, and as a Canadian, Australia is the best market outside of Canada and the US in the world. It is without question the single biggest market. It's better than Germany. It's better than Europe in general, because Europe is very fragmented. So the lack of that knowledge, I think, was an error, and developing our brand locally. And then again, a lack of understanding and respect for high quality flower was a miss initially, and I think we could have made some strides a little earlier, but I think we've largely course corrected both of those things now, and I think, but those are probably the two biggest ones.
The two biggest ones. So where do you see Tasmanian Botanics going?
I think we've done a lot of the big infrastructure projects are largely where we want them for the next kind of couple phases of our growth. I think what we want to focus on now is just really doubling down on driving that scale, and being the product that is always in stock, always consistent, and always accessible and affordable. And I think that is a big ask. I think it's our ambition to be the number one brand in the country in medicinal cannabis. And so, and I think we can be. And I think a lot of people were pretty quiet. I think we're getting up there now already. When I read some of the financials and things from our peers and distributors and things like that, when it comes to unit volume, we sit very close to the names that you often hear at the top of the list. We're just a little more quiet about it.
That's okay. You can be quiet about it.
Yeah, I mean, we like to just go out and do it, and not,
Quietly take over the room.
yeah, exactly, not talk about all the things we're going to do. We just like to go out and show what we're doing and let our products and our quality speak for itself.
All right, so if you could leave us with one tip, what would your one tip be?
So I think the tip that, and I wish we could put something like this on our containers, but it would be around storage, that, you know, all cannabis material is, it's plant material, and it is sensitive to the environment in which you keep it. Our products, as well as many others, are treated to ensure, low microbial count and low yeast and mold counts that are, among the most stringent requirements in the world in Australia. But as soon as that jar is opened, and it's the air around it comes in, you touch it, any implements or scissors or grinders or anything you have that might touch it, a different jar that you might keep it in, you've functionally exposed it to many new things. And so I think the safest place to keep your product is in the original container with the original humidity sachet if it came with one. But alternatively, whatever you're storing it in, you need to sterilize it between uses. You need to wash your hands before you touch it. It's because, fingers, any of that, it is, again, resinous, and it's a place that the more resinous and the more kind of trichomes cannabis has, the more susceptible to, microbial growth it's going to be.
Excellent. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, just really happy and really grateful for your time, and hopefully as we put out more product to the Australian and other markets, we can continue to iterate and leverage our vertical integration to respond quickly and keep our products top of mind for everyone.
And that's a wrap for my very first show on the road. Until we meet again, friends, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen. And remember, love many, trust few, and always paddle your own canoe.